A cowboy helps a starving native child, and 200 warriors show up at his barn. The lonely rancher had no idea that his simple act of kindness would bring an army to his doorstep the very next morning. Was this the beginning of a bloody revenge, or was something else happening that nobody could have predicted? Jedediah Walker was not like the other men who lived on the frontier. He kept to himself on his small ranch, 20 miles outside of Cedar Ridge, a dusty town full of people who didn't trust anyone who looked or thought differently. While other ranchers bragged about shooting at native hunting parties, Jedediah just wanted to be left alone to tend his cattle and fix his fences. The townspeople thought he was strange because he never joined their angry talk about the local tribes. Some even whispered that he was a coward. But Jedediah wasn't afraid of anything. He just didn't see the point in hating people he'd never met. His ranch sat in a valley between two ridges, with a small creek running through it. The barn was bigger than his house because animals mattered more than comfort out here. Every morning he woke before the sun to check his property line. The summer had been brutal, and water was getting scarce. He needed to make sure his cattle hadn't wandered too far looking for grass. On this particular morning, something was different. As Jedediah rode along the eastern edge of his land, his horse suddenly stopped and snorted. There, lying face down in the dirt near a dried bush, was a small figure. At first, Jedediah thought it might be a coyote or a deer, but as he got closer, his heart sank. It was a child, a native boy, no more than 7 or 8 years old, collapsed in the dust. The boy's clothes were torn, and his lips were cracked from thirst. His breathing was shallow, barely visible. Jedediah looked around quickly. There was nobody in sight. No tribe, no search party, nothing. Just the endless prairie stretching in every direction. The smart thing would be to ride away. If anyone from town found out he helped a native child, they'd call him a traitor. If the boy's tribe found him here, they might think Jedediah had hurt the child. Either way, trouble would follow. But Jedediah couldn't leave a dying child in the dirt. His own mother had taught him better than that before she died of fever 10 years ago. He dismounted and gently turned the boy over. The child's eyes fluttered open for just a second, filled with fear, then closed again. Jedediah lifted the boy carefully, surprised at how light he was. The child must have been starving for days. He placed the boy on his horse and walked alongside, leading them back to the ranch. He couldn't take the child into his house. If anyone came by and saw, word would spread fast. Instead, he carried the boy into the barn and made a bed of clean hay in an empty stall. He brought water from the well, just a few drops at first on the boy's lips. Too much water too fast could kill someone this dehydrated. The boy's eyes opened again as the water touched his mouth. He tried to pull away, but he was too weak. Jedediah spoke softly, the way he did with spooked horses. "Easy there, young one. I'm not going to hurt you, just trying to help." The boy probably didn't understand English, but sometimes the tone of voice mattered more than words. For 3 days, Jedediah nursed the child back to health. He shared his own meager food supplies, giving the boy small pieces of bread soaked in milk from his only cow. He made a thin soup from dried beef and the few vegetables from his garden. Slowly, the boy began to recover. By the second day, he could sit up. By the third, he could stand, though he was still weak. The boy never spoke, but his dark eyes followed Jedediah's every move. There was intelligence there, and something else. Maybe gratitude, maybe suspicion. It was hard to tell. Jedediah didn't try to force conversation. He just went about his work, checking on the boy between his chores, making sure he had enough food and water. On the 4th day, trouble arrived. Samuel Morrison, a traveling merchant who sold supplies to ranchers, stopped by for water. He was the worst kind of gossip, always spreading stories from ranch to ranch. Jedediah tried to keep him away from the barn, but Samuel was nosy. He pushed past and saw the native boy sitting in the stall, eating a piece of cornbread. "What in blazes are you doing with a savage in your barn?" Samuel's voice was loud and angry. "Have you lost your mind, Walker?" The boy was dying. I couldn't leave him. "You fool! His people will come looking for him. They'll burn your ranch and probably half the valley with it. And if they don't, the town will string you up for harboring the enemy." "He's a child, Samuel." "Not an enemy." Samuel spat on the ground. "All savages are enemies. You mark my words, Walker. This will not end well for you." The merchant left in a hurry, no doubt racing to town to spread the news. Jedediah knew his quiet life was about to get a lot more complicated. Sure enough, the next day, Sheriff Thompson rode up with two deputies. The sheriff was a big man with a gray beard and hard eyes. He didn't get off his horse, just looked down at Jedediah with disgust. "Heard you got yourself a pet savage," the sheriff said. "I have a sick child who needed help. That child is from the Lakota band that's been raiding settlements north of here. You're putting every white family in danger by keeping him. He's done nothing wrong. He doesn't have to. His very presence here is a provocation. Get rid of him, Walker, today, or I'll come back with more men and do it myself." The sheriff and his men rode off, leaving Jedediah with a choice. He could send the boy away, possibly to die alone on the prairie, or he could stand his ground and face whatever came next. He chose to stand his ground. That night, Jedediah barely slept. He kept thinking about what might happen. Would the town come for him? Would the boy's people show up? He had no way of knowing. The boy seemed to sense the tension. For the first time, he spoke a single word in accented English. "Danger?" Jedediah nodded. "Maybe, but not from me." The boy seemed to understand. He stood and walked to the barn door, looking out at the stars. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled a small leather cord from around his neck. On it hung a carved piece of bone, shaped like an eagle. He held it out to Jedediah. "No," Jedediah said, pushing it back gently. "That's yours." The boy insisted, pressing it into Jedediah's hand. Then he pointed to himself and said another word. "Dakota," his name. "Dakota," Jedediah repeated. "I'm Jedediah." The boy nodded and returned to his haybed. That night, both of them slept better, though neither knew why. The next morning came too soon. Jedediah woke to the sound of horses, many horses. His blood ran cold as he grabbed his rifle and stepped outside. But the rifle nearly fell from his hands when he saw what waited for him. The ridges surrounding his ranch were lined with warriors. 200 of them, maybe more, all on horseback, all armed with bows and rifles, all perfectly still and silent. They formed a complete circle around his property, blocking every possible escape route. The morning sun glinted off their weapons and painted their faces in sharp shadows. Jedediah's mouth went dry. This was it. They had come for the boy, and they would probably kill him for taking the child in the first place. No matter his intentions, he was a white man who had a native child in his barn. That was enough for violence in these lands. But he wouldn't run, and he wouldn't let them hurt Dakota, even if the boy was one of theirs. Jedediah stepped in front of the barn door, rifle at his side but not raised. If he was going to die, he'd die standing up, protecting a child. One warrior broke from the line and rode forward. He was older than the others, with gray streaking through his long black hair. His face was weathered but proud, and he wore more elaborate clothing than the others. This was a chief or war leader of some kind. He rode slowly, deliberately, never taking his eyes off Jedediah. The chief stopped his horse 20 feet away and dismounted. He was tall, taller than Jedediah, and moved with the confidence of a man who had never known fear. He carried a decorated war lance but made no move to use it. Instead, he walked forward slowly, his eyes studying Jedediah's face. Jedediah's finger tensed on the rifle trigger, but he didn't raise it. Something in the chief's eyes wasn't hostile. It was something else, something Jedediah couldn't quite read. The chief stopped just out of arm's reach. Then, to Jedediah's complete shock, he set his lance on the ground and raised his hand in a sign of peace. He spoke in broken English, his voice deep and measured. "You are the one who saved my son." It wasn't a question. Jedediah's mind raced. The chief's son. Dakota was the son of this war chief. "I found him dying. I gave him food and water. Nothing more." The chief nodded slowly. "My scouts watched. 3 days. They saw you share your food, saw you protect him from your own people, saw you stand guard when the lawmen came." Jedediah didn't know what to say. They had been watching the whole time. The chief continued. "My son went missing in a storm 8 days ago. We searched everywhere. We thought him dead, but you brought him back to life." Behind Jedediah, the barn door creaked open. Dakota stepped out, still weak but standing tall. He called out something in Lakota, and the chief's stern face broke into something that might have been a smile. The boy walked past Jedediah and embraced his father. The chief held his son tightly, then looked back at Jedediah. "You could have let him die. Your people would have praised you. Instead, you risked everything to save him. Why? Jedediah thought for a moment. Because it was the right thing to do. He's just a child. The chief studied him for a long moment, then nodded. He called out something in Lakota, and several warriors dismounted and approached. Jedediah tensed, but they weren't coming to attack. They were carrying things. Bundles of fur, dressed deer hides, dried meat, and woven blankets. They set these gifts at Jedediah's feet. Then two more warriors approached, leading two beautiful painted horses. "These are yours now," the chief said, "a small payment for a debt that cannot be repaid." "I don't need payment. I didn't do it for a reward." "I know. That is why you must accept. You are now a friend of the Lakota. My warriors will know your face. Your land is under our protection. Anyone who threatens you threatens us." The chief reached into a pouch at his side and pulled out an eagle feather. He stepped forward and tied it to Jedediah's rifle barrel. "So all will know you are protected." Dakota said something to his father, then approached Jedediah. He pointed to the bone carving Jedediah had tried to return the night before, then to Jedediah's pocket. The message was clear. "Keep it." The chief mounted his horse and raised his lance. All around the ranch, 200 warriors raised their weapons in salute. The sound echoed across the valley like thunder. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, they began to leave. Within minutes, the ridges were empty, and Jedediah stood alone with more wealth than he'd ever owned, in a story nobody would believe. The gifts from the tribe changed Jedediah's life, but not as much as what happened next. Word spread quickly about the warriors' visit, but not the story people expected. The town learned that Jedediah Walker, the quiet rancher they'd called a coward, had earned the respect and protection of the most feared tribe in the territory. Suddenly, everyone wanted to be his friend. But Jedediah remained the same man he'd always been. Quiet, keeping to himself, treating everyone with the same basic decency. He used the furs and goods from the tribe to help struggling families in town get through the hard winter that followed. He never bragged about what had happened, never used his connection to the tribe for personal gain. Sometimes when he was checking his property line, he'd see riders on the ridges, warriors watching, keeping their promise of protection. He'd raise his hand in greeting, and they'd return the gesture before disappearing into the prairie. One day about a year later, Dakota returned. He was taller, stronger, and spoke better English. He stayed for a week, helping with the ranch work and teaching Jedediah some words in Lakota. Before he left, he said something Jedediah never forgot. "You saved me when saving me could have cost you everything. My people will tell this story for generations. You proved that kindness is the strongest medicine, stronger than fear, stronger than hate." Jedediah lived a long life on that ranch. He never married, never had children of his own, but he was never alone. The tribe kept their word. His land was never threatened, his cattle never stolen. When he finally died at the age of 78, warriors appeared at his funeral, standing silent guard as the town buried him. They left an eagle feather on his grave, a final sign of respect for the cowboy who chose kindness over fear. The story of Jedediah Walker spread across the frontier and beyond. It became proof that even in the hardest times, when division and distrust run deep, a single act of compassion can bridge any gap. One man's choice to help a starving child created a bond between two peoples that lasted for generations. If this story touched your heart, let us know what you think in the comments below. Remember that kindness costs nothing but can change everything. Like this video if you believe in the power of compassion, and subscribe to hear more incredible true stories from the Old West where courage and honor meant everything.